spent a lot of time working on these, so I'm glad I get to share them with you. So give me just a second to set up the slideshow correctly here. Okay, all right. So, I'm going to talk about sort of why these exist and sort of how they came to be, and then I'm going to talk about exactly what's contained in them and how to use them, get you started. So, what I anticipate is that once I get into the weeds of what you have, you'll have a lot of questions. I don't have that many slides, and so we can, spend a lot of time kind of answering your questions. There'll be a couple of things I think some of you may be surprised to see, and hopefully I'll be able to explain why they're here. And so I think that will be great. So let me start by saying that I'm going to call these today I'm going to call them the free lesson set. So foundational reading lesson set, F and then RE for free. So I'm going to call them the free lesson set, and they're going to be called the free lesson set because they are in fact totally free. So where did the idea for this come from? The idea started with a question that I get asked a lot, which is, how do I teach word recognition if my school can't afford a curriculum? And so people, will say that. And so I often feel at a loss for words. And I used to say there are resources online and you can put some of these together. And that is great. And there are a lot of great things online. There are lots of examples, there are sample materials, and some of them are really evidence-based. Ones that you might be able to look at are from IES, the Institute for Education Sciences, and the regional education laboratories, which are part of IES, that have some really good resources as well. The Southeast REL is particularly well known for its resources. And the Office of Special Education Programs also has some good resources, and I recommend those. There are also nationally known groups and research centers with a long history. The Florida Center for Reading Research is one of those, so that's one place. The frustrating part for me, and people have been developing more things lately, but there's usually not a complete scope and sequence. There's usually not a complete set of materials. And so it's sort of like, it'll get you through a couple of weeks of instruction and might give you some ideas, but it's not going to get you through a whole year. It's not going to teach kids kind of everything. And so I always found that really frustrating, that I couldn't give people kind of like a curriculum of a kind. So I decided that we needed something that was available to people when they didn't have something else that was evidence-based or research-based. And so there are definitely good programs that exist, and this is not about not having a program. If you have a program, I would actually say it's better than this, in that, this has not, it's organized in some ways, and there's also some work to do in other ways to put things together. And I think programs often have a little bit less of that work, but so I still recommend those. At the same time, if you don't have them, this is what that's about. And for those of you who do have them, it might be an interesting or useful supplement for you as well. So what is the set of free lessons, or the free lesson set I'm going to talk about? And I keep saying free because they are free, and that's really important. What they contain is a set of materials, lists of words, and these structured lesson guides that you'll be able to use to help you understand what is involved in doing the lessons and how do you actually execute them with students. And it is really totally, completely free. You don't have to pay anything to get them. And how did these get created? It's really thanks to the Inclusion in Texas initiative. So I was fortunate to work with Kara Myers, used to be Kara Wiley, now Kara Myers, who worked at the Education Service Center 20 in Texas, and was the leader of the Inclusion in Texas initiative with Amy Strach, and they were the leaders there. And at the TEA, Texas Education Agency level, Michelle Reeves was really great in that she evaluated some of the materials, and Laura Wilk, who is a specialist, I don't think she's with TEA anymore, but she sort of was looking at the product overall. I do want to say that these folks don't necessarily endorse everything in this, so I don't want you to think that they are, totally on board with every single thing here. A number of these folks are letters trainers, and some of the things in here are going to be slightly different than letters. For those of you who know letters, LETRS, I forget what it stands for, but it was designed by Louisa Moats and is something that is available through, I think it's Sopris Cambium, and it's a professional development sequence to teach people about reading and aspects of reading. And again, most of the stuff is really sort of related to that and consistent with that, but not everything. And because Kara and Michelle in particular have background in letters, I don't want to imply that they agreed with everything, but they really were helpful in doing this. Michelle was the primary reviewer and Kara was the primary sort of project leader. And I just really want to acknowledge how hard Kara worked to make all this happen. So I want to thank her on camera. And so where all this stuff lived was on the Inclusion in Texas website, not lived, past tense, present tense. So you can go to the Inclusion in Texas website and all of these things are available there, and I'll show you what that looks like. Let me find the right screen here. So if you go to the I'll show these on slides too, but if you go to the Inclusion in Texas website, which is inclusionintexas.org, that is where the lessons live. If you find a page that looks like this, then you are looking at the right thing. And on the site, sorry, I forgot to say this. So again, I want to be clear, people aren't supporting the content per se. These were vetted and approved by the Texas Education Agency. So they have looked at them and approved them. The lessons are freely available, but belong to the Texas Education Agency, so you can't use them for commercial purposes. And there are a couple of things that sort of still belong to me, but are mostly owned by TEA, and so you can't use them commercially, just so you know. How do you get to them? Okay, so we're going to go to the inclusionintexas.org website, and you want to go to the section that says Inclusive Practices in Reading, right here. And if you look at the drop-down menu, if you just hover over that, if you're on a computer, if you're on a tablet, I'm not sure how it'll work, or on a phone, not sure how it'll work, but and then you click on Instructional Resources, this will come up, and this is the page that has all of the foundational, the free lessons are all right here, and all the information. And I'm glad we're doing this because there's a lot to this and it's a little bit hard to navigate. Okay, so once you get there, I do want to say too, there is a math version of this also. So it's not identical, but my colleague Sarah Powell at the University of Texas at Austin did a similar thing for math. So if you go to Inclusive Practices in Math, there is a complete set of materials, instructional routines for 23 different skills in mathematics. So if you do any math instruction, use this website. Similar to what I'm going to show you, it has in total lessons with all the materials and all of the instructional guides. So it's really, really good. So if you know a math specialist or you do math instruction, please look at that also. I think you'll find it really, really helpful. So once you're on the Inclusive Practice in Reading Instructional Resources page, you need to figure out what are you going to download. So at the bottom of the page, and I'm going to show you from the website as well. The bottom of the page, there are several tabs that look like this. And so the way you access them is you have to click on the little arrow. I think if you click on the words, it'll do it too. But the little arrow sort of indicates you can go like open a sort of subsection of this. And so you want to make sure that you click on the little arrow because these are the parts of the lessons that you're going to need. The materials are buried in these, not buried in these, they're inside of these. So these are the key things, and you want to start with the user guide, which I will explain to you in a second. So, and they should download as a PDF. They're all designed to be PDFs. They're easy to use. And so the user guide contains an overview, shows you a little bit about how the pieces fit together. It gives you instructions for creating a lesson, tips for effective instruction, and a glossary. So let me show you, I'll just show you what that actually looks like. So I'm actually going to download them myself because I don't actually have them. I have them somewhere in my computer, but just easier just to download them. So, okay, so here is the, let's see, sometimes my computer doesn't like to do this. Okay, so here's the user guide. And if you just kind of flip through it, you have here sort of a summary of what's in this. It's similar to what I said is here. There is information about how the lesson guides work. So there is a specific kind of practice model and practice approach to them that I will share with you in the lesson guides. And that shows you the components of each of those guides. Then it talks about the different types of things that are covered there, which I'll say more about in a minute. And then it shows you how to put all the materials together, and it has a very specific description of how to put these things together. There is also like a lesson template that is a very long and detailed document, but the job of this document is to help you create a lesson. And so, so basically, it will talk you through beginning on page 11, and I'll show you more about this. It shows you how to create a lesson. It tells you about how long things should take on the left side. It tells you what category of topic you would be covering. It suggests to you how many words to introduce, how many words to review. So this is really kind of the key resource to help you put together a lesson. So you want to look at pages 11 through, it goes all the way to 17. So those are the kind of key things. And then on 18 and on, this sort of has like a blank version of it, so it's not so overwhelming for you. And actually, there is a Word version of this. And Lisa, remind me at the end to share with everyone the Microsoft Word version of this so you can actually type in it. So that was one thing that they didn't do, was they made everything a PDF, but that will be useful. So just remind me at the end, and you can share the link to that with everybody. Okay, so that's what's in here. And again, the key thing that for creating a lesson you're going to want is this guide on pages 11 through 17, because it tells you. So for example, here are the different activities you might choose from for phonological awareness. It tells you how many words to teach and how many sounds they might have, depending on the kids you're working with. It gives you tips about when to do 3 sounds versus doing 4 sounds, and how to think about words you might choose. For example, here it says, early on, only do 3 sound words. Change to 4 sounds only after students have mastered 3 sound words. And it says, choose words that have the sound spellings you're introducing or reviewing. If students have mastered most PA tasks, you don't have to continue with PA lessons, which is probably a controversial statement, which I will defend later. And so it gives you information about that. And then it shows you here the lesson guide that goes with that. So this is one of the phonological awareness lesson guides. And I will show you more about what those look like. So that's most of the guide. The last thing that's in this is a glossary. So the glossary is here because we wanted to make sure that people had kind of a common language for things. And so for example, like things like closed syllables, not everybody knows about that. And so sort of wanted to make sure that people had an understanding of those things. There's also here some suggested language for students. So in letters, I understand, because I've never taught letters or participated in letters training, but my understanding from my letter trainer friends is that there is in letters and again, if you don't do letters, this is still important for you to know, there is language about what you're supposed to say to students. And my view of language for students is that simpler is better. And so I tend not to emphasize some words that other people do. And I tend not to talk about sort of technical language of words. So people, for example, often use the word digraph, which is fine. You know, it's 2 letters that make 1 sound. That's okay, but I often refer to those as letter teams rather than digraphs. The reason is that the idea of a letter team is pretty intuitive to, say, a 6, 7, 8-year-old, because these lessons can be used with kids at or below grade level. So I should have said, this is really designed for kids who are about a 1st grade level, who are learning word recognition skills at about that level. So it's a comprehensive lesson set for those kids. So again, I use the word letter team rather than digraph with students, but we also did put in here that if you wanted to use the word for language for students, if you wanted to use the word digraph, that's okay. And that's what actually the state of Texas sort of requires, and that's also why this is here. So it's sort of your call, but I will tell you that I recommend letter team rather than digraph. I also use letter team rather than vowel team if you use the word letter team. And for those of you who don't know what I mean by that, a letter team is 2 letters that say 1 sound. It's also called a digraph. And that includes things like, you know, SH here or AI. An associated one is a diphthong. So a diphthong is a sound like in brow or boy. And often those can be, you can teach kids the word diphthong. I don't think that's necessary. I only know of a couple of programs that do that. I think it's confusing. And so people often call that a letter team or call that a digraph. I would not recommend calling it a diphthong. I think that would be confusing, but some people do that. I definitely wouldn't recommend it. So anyway, so throughout here, there are different explanations of different terms and recommendations for what to say to students. And so all of these are here so that you can kind of get a sense of what this, you know, what these things mean and how to think about them. So, and a few things are sort of unique in terms of the way I describe them. Like one of them is rhyme team, which is a term that other people have used a little bit, but I sort of used here. And anyway, so I'll talk more about that in a little bit. So that's kind of a key document. And when if you have questions later about why it's called that, or, you know, want to tell me that you don't agree, which is fine, then that's okay, we can do that. One thing I do want to point out to you is the word sound spelling, or, you know, combined word, I don't know, two word phrase, is that I'm using this as a noun phrase. So a sound spelling is something that is a connection between a sound or sounds and a spelling. So A says ah, that's a sound spelling. So A is the spelling for the sound ah. So that's important to know that that's what a sound spelling is. And that's language that is used throughout. I think this language is really helpful because so people don't like the term letter sound because it could be more than one letter, right? So it could be AI says A, well, AI is not a letter, it's 2 letters. You can call those sound symbol correspondences. I think that's confusing for kids. You can also call them grapheme phoneme correspondences. I also think that's confusing for kids. So I've always just called them sound spellings. I think that term is pretty helpful. So that is all that's in the user guide. So then let me talk about what we have in terms of lesson guides. So the lesson guides are the activities that you do. And so it's an explanation how you do the activities. It's not the only way to do it. They were designed, the guides were designed to make it possible for you to do this without a lot of additional sort of learning of like what's the best way to do this. They're designed to be pretty simple and follow kind of a modeling and practice structure. So let me show you what I mean by that. So here's the lesson guide for phonological awareness initial sounds. And so you can see here the lesson guide is divided into, my screen will make this bigger, into 3 parts. There's a model part, a practice part, and a closure part. Really the core here is the modeling and practice. So here it says, today we are listening for the initial sound or first sound in a word. We are listening for B, watch, watch/listen. There are pictures for all these. I'll show you those in a minute. The word is bat. Hold up the bat picture. The first sound is B, bat, B. And then I do that as a model myself, okay? Because with the model, the students watch and listen. They don't actually do it because you're modeling to show them how it works. And then practice. This is where we're going to do this a lot of times with the kids. The models are short, practice is longer, in order to give the kids a lot of experience with this. So the instructions here, I'll say the word, you say the word and the first sound, ready, listen. Hold up the big picture, book, word, book. Think of the first sound. Say the first sound, say the word and first sound, book, book, and repeat that with other words. And so you continue to do that throughout the phonological awareness lesson for the initial sound. And then when you're done, you can say this, we practice listening for the initial or first sound of word. What did we practice? Listening for the first sound. And then for this lesson, what first sound we listen for? B. Tell your partner one word that starts with B, and the students can say something to each other. And then you say, I heard blank, some students say some words. The first sound of these words is B. And so that gives you kind of a guide for how to do the lesson. And so, and really every time it's going to be structured as a model and practice. The models are designed to be short and quick, and the teacher leads them entirely. So the students are just watching or listening. And then you go on to practice, and the practice is designed to be more of the time. So you're just going to model and practice very quickly. You can practice some of the same words you modeled. That's okay to do. And you can go back and forth with students if they make a mistake during practice. You can go back and model it again. But the model practice approach is throughout. And that's a data-based approach to doing this. So giving students a very clear model where they're not necessarily participating. And then extensive practice, that's an explicit instruction approach that has a lot of evidence to support it. And also you'll note here, like, some people will go right into having the kids practice with them. It's important to do a model where the kids see you do it, and then to do a lot of practice. So the models are quick, the practice is extensive. So you want to practice, 10 words, even though you're going to model 3 to 5 examples, and you're going to do that pretty quickly. You want them to practice more, because one thing that evidence shows is that practice is really the key to student success with any of these things. So there are phonological awareness lessons for guides, for initial sounds, for final sounds, for medial sounds, for segmenting, and for blending. Now, there is not anything else covered here in terms of the lesson. The lesson guides don't cover other kind of complex activities you can do for phonological awareness. And it used to be that people were okay with that. More recently, people have started to focus on doing more complex phonological awareness exercises, a lot of things like replacing sounds and deleting sounds and things like that. Those are not as strongly supported by research. And the ones that are most strongly associated with success in reading and spelling are blending and segmenting. So getting kids, blending is saying sounds and putting them together. Segmenting is saying a word, breaking it apart into its sounds. And so, so blending would be, the sounds are d, r, m. The word is drum, and I show the card for drum. And then I have the students say this. So we will say each sound and then say the whole word. Listen, because I have a picture of the dress. So d, r, s, word, dress. And then you hold the dress card to show the answer again. And so they repeat that with other words. And the same thing for segmenting. Let's button this one. We have a similar kind of routine. So these are the guides for how to do the phonological awareness activities. So that's that. That's the first part. Then we have a sound spelling component. So I already talked about that. For phonics, we have the sound spellings and phonograms and all of this. And then we also have, so let me say this more clearly. For the sound spelling section of the website, this includes kind of the phonics component. So sound spellings, as I said, that's phonics, that's decoding. It has routines or guides for introducing, reviewing, and reading words. For phonograms, which I'll say more about later, there are routines for introducing and reading them. There are games to practice in different ways, and then there are routines for generalizing to spelling and text reading. You should note that there are no texts in the program, the lesson sets. So I I am not an expert on text design, although I have colleagues who do this really well. And it's also very expensive to make texts, and it was not possible to do it with in this project, but that is something that's really important to do, is to link these lessons to texts or sentences even, which there are ways to do that I didn't include here, but this is what we meant by generalizing skills. Okay, so now let's get into the instructional materials. So on the website again, there are the materials down here, and this is the next thing we're going to cover. So just to explain again, what we just talked about were the lesson guides. So the lesson guides are the little model and practice sort of activities. They're all colored. So if you have something with a color at the top, then you know that that's one of the lesson guides. And then down here, you have the material. So this is really kind of what you use. So this was sort of how do you teach it? One thing that I want to make sure teachers had access to. And then here's what the lesson materials actually are. And so the first thing that it includes is a list of all of the phonological awareness lesson pictures. So these are organized by sound that you might want to do. So these are all words that start with the B sound, and there's a whole set of these that go with the B sound. So, and so let me just pull that up. So if you look at this, it has, let's see. Okay, wait, that's a different, there are two versions of this. Let me show you, make sure I get the right one. Okay, nope, not the right one. Okay. They're sort of redundant, but they're organized differently. So, the names of these are actually not as clear as they could be. The picture cards are the ones that have the pictures organized by sound. So these are all the ones for the B sound. These are all the ones for the sh sound, and so on. They're in alphabetical order, even though sounds aren't letters, but they're in alphabetical order by phoneme. And so they will show you for the initial phoneme, for the final phoneme, for the medial phoneme, it'll show you them by sound. So you can look at those. So there are ones for basically, there are over 200 of these. So they are available for free. They were designed by a local artist here in Connecticut, Nicholas Kahn, who I think did a great job of these. So these are free. And so, if you want to use them for lessons that you don't use the lesson guides, that's fine. These are freely available for you to use in any way that you'd like. And that was part of my plan, was that if you needed lesson, sounds for these, for lessons, you would have these. The words at the bottom are just to make clear what is a picture of. So, this is supposed to be a frown, not just like a sad face. You could use it for sad too, although that's not the way we designed it. And so anyway, so the pictures aren't there to say to this, not to spell with the students, because again, phonological awareness lessons are just sound based. And I'm sort of assuming, you all have a lot of prior knowledge about letter and sound structure, but if you're not as familiar, phonemes are sounds. Phonological awareness practice is about practicing understanding the sound structure of the language. When you do that, you don't always use letters. And so the pictures at the bottom aren't necessarily for you to read with the students. They are, they're just kind of there to tell you what it is. So this is a game, which is pretty obvious, but if there's one that's less obvious, like that's a goose, not a duck, doesn't really matter, but they're all there for you. The other way that they're organized, so the other document is the one that says picture a list. And this list basically just means that they're words that are organized by actually the number of sounds that they have. So in the lesson guide, or in the lesson design, let's see, where's the guide? Okay, here's the guide, the user guide. So in the, I forget what we called this. I don't know. So this is like a organizer, I guess. So when you're looking at the organizer that shows you how to put a lesson together, in here, it will say selecting words that you teach. Say select words with 3 to 4 sounds depending on student skill. Early on, only do 3 sound words, change to 4 sounds only after students have mastered 3 sound words, because you want it to them to sort of build skills over time. So these are actually organized by the number of sounds. So you can practice that way in the alphabetical order after that. And what you should know too is that because it's about sounds and not about letters, you'll notice that you wouldn't teach kids the oo sound for roof right away, but this is about the sounds, not the letters. So you can use roof if you're focused on the r sound at the beginning, because the r sound at the beginning is still a sound, even though you wouldn't. It's still a sound you teach early in lessons, even though you haven't taught the oo sound. Okay, so that's what the phonological awareness lessons are. Next, we're going to talk about sound spellings. So the thing here is to look first at what you need first is the sequence chart. So you want to note for yourself, it's not really highlighted here, but look at the sound spelling sequence chart first, because that shows you how the lessons are organized and gives you a little bit of information about each of the sound spellings that's taught in the, so here we see, so we have sound spelling, we have a clue word, we have a sentence that goes with the clue word, and any notes about the sound spelling. So, so for the first one, n equals n, the clue is a nap. I'll show you the picture of that a little bit later. And there's a sentence that you use to introduce it to students that's mentioned in the lesson guide for sound spelling introduction. And then a note has to do with, is there anything extra that you need to know to share with students or to think about? So here, this is the ah sound, the clue is apple, and this sentence is the apple cries ah. Here's what it says in the note. This is the first vowel taught in the program. It is a short vowel. The short vowel is common, the term short vowel is commonly used. Call this short A. It's the first lesson that includes decoding. Use the sounding out routine to read and using ah and n. Okay, so there are instructions like this for every one of these. So it'll tell you some things that you need to do. So for example, in the 4th lesson, you do the word in, and it says to explain to students that sometimes if you have the same letter twice, it can say one thing. And so, if they say you just tell them that you say it at one time. And so every one of these lessons comes with information like about clues and so on to help you know what to talk to the students about. This information is also repeated on the cards that you get, the clue cards as well. So, I designed this so that it would have lots of information about how to do this, and it gets short here. This is a short vowel, which you've already introduced students to. So that has the notes, but also notice this is the sequence in which letter sounds are introduced. So if you want to know what letter sounds are taught, this is what you want to look at, because this has all of the letter sounds that are taught. It is not as comprehensive as you sometimes see in other programs. That's actually intentional. So, when we did this, when we designed this, I have a database of like 12,000 English words that includes their pronunciations with their spelling. So it has all their sound spellings. And it calculated how often does each of these sound spellings occur. And we only included ones that occurred about 1,000 times or more. So that was something that we did just so that like, why are some things not included? Like KN says, didn't make the cut, right? So it's just not as frequent enough for us to include it in the lesson. So certain things you might expect to see aren't actually there. Excuse me. So this is kind of the key thing to look at. And I am certain some of you will sort of not have questions about this, or not like the way that it's organized, or have thoughts about the notes that are here. That's okay. This is designed to give you materials, to give you guidance. If you don't like it, this is for people to use. So you can use it however you want. You don't have to use it the way that I designed it. And I am happy for you to do that as long as you use them, or as long as they get used. I don't care if you do them exactly the way that they are designed, but there's at least one reason that that can be useful. So, so now you've looked at the sequence chart. Let's look at the clue cards. So the clue cards are designed to, I'll just show you actually just one of them here. So this is a sound spelling clue card. All of them include like a picture to remind students about what the sound is. So this is for muffins. So the letter M says The clue reminds students that the letter M says So you have always the picture, and then you have the letter or letters, if it's a letter team, that represent that the picture is aligned with. Okay, so for every lesson, there's one of these. So for all 40 some odd sounds in English, there is a clue card for each of those. And we spent a lot of time selecting the clue cards. You might not like all of them, and you might have questions about why we chose them or something like that. And I'm happy to answer those questions or for you to disagree. But I can tell you, so for example, one that some people have already asked about is the one for I think it is. Where is the list? Let's see, download this again. So the one that people, somebody's tiger. Okay, so tiger is the spelling for I, is the card for I. People have asked, why is tiger for I? Because it doesn't start with an I. That's intentional. It's because the sound I usually occurs in the middle or at the end of a word rather than at the beginning. And so we have all sorts of words that have I in them. So there's tiger, there's kite, there's night. And it's also the case that the spellings don't all match. So tiger is, the letter I is what says tiger in that word, but there are other spellings as well. There's IGH and there's I blank E and so on, a vowel consonant E pattern. And all of those are there, and we actually just keep adding to the card. So the next time they see it, we add the vowel consonant E pattern. The next time we add the IGH and the Y spellings of I. And so basically all the card starts to include all the spellings associated with the sound. This is an evidence-based way of organizing sound spellings. It's to organize them by sound rather than by a letter. And they're not taught in alphabetical order. That's also intentional. And the fact that the clue card is only one spelling, that's also both intentional, and it's not possible or reasonable to have one of these for every spelling. We have 82 spellings, but there are only about 40 sounds. So it's not necessary to do these. You'll also notice that the I card appears multiple times, and that's because we keep adding to it. So we first teach I, and the next lesson we teach the I with the consonant and the E, then we teach the IGH, and we finally teach the Y. So we add to the card. That's why there are different versions as the students learn that in the next lesson. So, so I think those generally are pretty good. We spent a lot of time on them, spent a lot of time, making them good. There's one that we changed very late, and we have a new picture for oo, which is a moose. And so this is, it's actually supposed to be in here. That was, I'll have to tell TEA because that was supposed to be changed. But it didn't get changed. I thought it was. In any case, we have one that's moose for instead of raccoon for the oo sound. So that's one that's been changed, but everything else is still the same. Okay, so then the last thing with these sound spellings is the decodable word list and the decodable word cards. So decodable word list is, it's sort of like combines the information I just presented with a list of words. So, so this is N says, this is not for you to share with kids. This is just for your reference. And so the N says and it shows you the sound associated or the card associated with it. So this is I think Nick naps at noon, I think is a sentence, and the clue is nap. And so students, you can say, the clue is nap. It'll tell you the clue as well on the card. And then what it says that same information that I showed you on the other page. And then this is the important part, and I think what makes this, for me at least, kind of exciting. It gives you a list of decodable words that are decodable using the sound spellings that students have already learned. So nothing that appears here is taught, is practiced, unless it has already occurred earlier in the sound spelling sequence. So here we do and, because we can only do a and because we only learn those ones. Then we add the T, here are more words, the I, here are more words, and so on. And so basically the idea is that every lesson you add more words because you can read more words based on new sound spellings that you've learned. So this is the part that to me makes this really exciting, is I've never had something when I taught and when I have to talk to people about like, what do you have available? And I say, I don't have anything, this fixes it. So even if you decide you don't want to do them in the order that I did them, even if you decide you don't like all the pictures and so on, you have a list of letter sound words with the sound spellings in them that are all decodable based on, if you follow the order that I came up with, then they're all decodable based on the previous ones. And they're designed to be generally pretty frequent, but they're not always as frequent as they're not. Yeah, this one is S is taught earlier. This is just the plural version of S. But these are usually the words are usually pretty frequent. Some of them are not. Some of them are like reports is not as frequent. But this basically gives you a list of all the words that are decodable, and you pick the ones that you would like to do. So so that's that. And I'll just briefly show you a couple more things so we can go on to, and then along with this is another resource, the word cards. So along with this is a set of cards that contains all of the words that are decodable. So if you are doing like an online lesson, all the words are already here. And they are organized by the number of syllables. So if you have longer words, then then they're on a separate page. So you can use these the way they're written. If you want to practice these, you can do them. And if you don't like all the words, you can, get rid of a word if you want to, and so on. Like mantis, you might not want to do mantis just because it's a long word for kids. But we didn't, this is on the 2-syllable list, and you don't have to do that. So that is the list of words. So there is a similar. So there are similar cards for high frequency words and for phonograms for high frequency words. I'm not going to show you the cards because we already looked at a similar thing. But what is here is a brand new way of organizing the high frequency words, which I designed using more modern databases than Dolch and Fry. So Dolch and Fry were, I think, created in the 30s and 50s. This is an updated version of that. It's not dramatically different, but there are some differences in terms of the organization of these things that it reads across here that I think make it helpful to have in this kind of modern era. But there's based on evaluating 4 different modern databases of words that exist in English. So that is the high frequency word list, and it has its own set of cards. And finally, phonograms. Phonograms are like rhyme units. Some people really hate rhyme units. So rhyme units are when you have letters that include the vowel and all the sounds after it. These are here because there are some data indicating that it's helpful for students to combine, to learn that the letters at the end make a single sound. The data are not as strong for doing this as they are for doing individual letter sounds, but because there are data on this, I wanted to make sure that it was included. This isn't included in the scope and sequence. So because the emphasis was on the letter sounds, this isn't in the scope and sequence. So that's one thing that I added them in for sort of teachers to make strategic decisions. these are organized by the number of words that contain those phonograms. So you can choose the words that contain those phonograms. And there are some words at the end of the word, and there are also ones where it's not at the end of the word. So, and they're not all decodable based on what you learned so far. So in other words, the word, you could do the word pen, even if you haven't taught the e and the n or even the p sound. So, and so that's one thing. And also they don't have to be at the end of the word. Some people don't teach them that they have to be at the end of the word. And so you can do that also. So this is here because there's some data that suggests it's effective. I also, some people really like this kind of thing. There are lesson guides for these too. And so I wanted these to be accessible to people who did more onset rhyme things. It gives you a sense of how many words can be pronounced with these. What you'll find interesting, or at least I found interesting, is that it's a lot fewer words. There are about 4,000 words that you can read in the with the sound spellings. It's many fewer words here, and they get pretty infrequent. They are only here. The is the 94th most frequent one, and there are only 6 words where the appears at the end of the word, and none of them longer words at the end. So it's interesting that there are a lot fewer words that have those phonograms. Okay, that's it. So I don't think there's anything else to tell you except that there's a lot to it. And there is, again, that guide to show you how to put a lesson together. I don't expect that if you want to follow all of this, I don't expect that you will want to do everything that's in here. There are some ways in which, like you just may decide you want to change it and you only want certain things, you don't want other things. That's okay. These are free. These are for you to use. You can use whatever it is that you want that you think will support your instruction. And I'm happy to, hear different people's feedback about them. I don't think TEA, Texas Education Agency, is going to change them, but if there's some kind of errors, they might be willing to change them. Like we'll fix the moose thing because I thought that was fixed, but isn't. So in any case, that's all. I'm excited to have you ask questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Devin. This is very exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited too.
So we had one question so far, and then we can just open it up to the group in general.
Yep.
So Deb, do you want to share your question? Do you want to unmute and ask, or do you want me to ask?
Sure, I can ask it. So at the beginning of your lessons, was there discussion about adding articulatory gestures? And can you talk about how that discussion went and why it's absent in the lesson?
Yeah, so you're talking, I mean, there are a couple ways to think about articulatory gestures. You're talking about kind of like sound, like kind of a lip pop, like sort of like
correct.
Our attention to the production of the sounds.
Yeah, correct. Because like so many of the kids that I work with have articulatory issues. Mm-hmm. But in addition, like, so I've switched how I try and differentiate B's and D's for those kids. And by using the articulatory information that in a B, say, B, your lips are together. So that means you make your straight line first. Where when you say G, your mouth is open. And so you have to have, and I've seen a switch in how quickly my kids transition from that, the BD confusion goes away quicker.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that, adding those features can be useful for some kids. Yep. I think that there's nothing that says you can't do it, of course. The data on that aren't so strong that I felt strongly that it should be included. There are programs that use it and programs that don't, and both of those types are effective. One of the programs that uses that is the Lindenwood Bell phoneme sequencing program, which I taught at one time, and it does that. And Lindenwood Bell has positive effects on student achievement for kids who have serious academic difficulty in reading. So that includes those articulatory gestures, and it is effective. There's also like early interventions in reading is another program that doesn't do that and also has good effects on reading. So some of so there are programs that have that built in. that are successful, there are programs that don't have that built in that are successful. But I think that if you find it to be helpful for certain kids, then I certainly would encourage you to use it. I mean, kids vary, and if kids have difficulty with, production of the sound, then sort of, or even if they don't have difficulty with it, but you think it's good to draw their attention to it, do it. I don't have any objection to that at all. I think you also asked, Deb, about the nasal sounds.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, so the answer on that is actually, I used to worry about that. I've decided, based on some data, that it's actually not a problem for kids to be having to make that transition. So when you have for what Deb is asking about, it's like you have and n, and that doesn't, an is not the same as an, right? But what data seem to suggest is that part of reading is sort of understanding in your brain and in your mouth how to make those adjustments. And it's something that we don't do consciously, but that is something that we do all the time. So, like, for example, in the word rabbit, better example is kitten. The medial sound in kitten isn't a t sound, it's kind of a sound, right? But we still think of it as a t sound, and our brain has kind of done this juggling to turn these individual phonemes into words. And so it seems that that is a useful thing for students to be exposed to, because that is part of what reading entails, is making these adjustments. Even when we do phonics, we're always going to have to make these kind of little adjustments in our pronunciations. And that's why it's not included in, I chose not to sort of separate those out. I did think about it, but we decided not to do it because of the data suggesting that it's important for kids to be able to do those subtle manipulations.
Devin, I think that depends on where you are in the country, that sometimes they really do impact it pretty significantly. Like doing pen in the South, if it's pen or pin, it's all the same, right?
Yep.
Versus being in the Midwest, we don't have a lot of that going on.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, I think there's regional variation, there's dialectical variation, right? Like kids who speak African-American English, which is a different dialect, like there are data suggesting that those kids may need additional support, because the way that African-American English phonology works is slightly different than kind of,
right,
general American, kind of that Midwestern English. And so general American is a term that describes sort of Ohio-based pronunciations of things. And I mean that sincerely, like literally Ohio seems to be sort of the middle of all of our different pronunciations. But so there are dialects like African-American English that differ from general American and in the phonology, which means in the sound structure. And there are not tons of them, but they can make a difference in terms of learning to read. So yeah, so in terms of regional dialects, in terms of cultural dialects, like all of those things will matter and make a difference in terms of things you want to emphasize. And yeah, that will sort of differ from kid to kid and school to school. And it might be easier, maybe it's easier for kids in the South to learn, an they have, well, I guess maybe it's harder because they have to kind of make that manipulation. But, that's part of what reading is. I mean, I grew up in Maine. There's a lot of, the AR doesn't say the same thing in Maine that it does in other places.
No, it doesn't. Thanks.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. We had another question, Deb Bishop. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, I was just wondering about your position on syllabication to determine vowel sounds.
You mean like sort of breaking it up in the long, short, kind of open, close kind of thing?
Yeah, my experience with particularly younger students is that doing simple syllabication ends up equipping them to be able to rapidly determine vowel sounds, and they've got something in the tank to do that.
Yeah, so I would say it depends what you mean by simple, but I will say that I agree with you. If I'm going to describe you what I think you mean by simple, maybe, and you can tell me. So one thing kids need to know is that at the end of a syllable, vowels can say different things. They can say the long sound and the short sound, and sometimes they can say the schwa sound. for me, I'm still not sure if I want to talk about the schwa sound, but it occurs so frequently, it's probably a good idea. But the vowels can say the long sound when the vowel is at the end of the syllable. You can say the short sound often when it's in the middle of the syllable, and it can say the schwa sound kind of in either position. But knowing that the long sounds and short sounds can be in those syllables, and that if it's at the end, it's the long sound, that can be useful to students because they can break the word according to, if you have like a little card and the word is, let's say, cabin, you can break it after the B, so you have cab and you can say cab, or you can break it after the A and you can say K, because you know that there's this difference when you say the short sound and the long sound. And breaking it up in different ways and knowing that there are those patterns, that's really helpful, I think, for a lot of kids to be able to see how to do that and to practice that. You know, for a lot of you probably know the terms open and closed syllables, and an open syllable is a case where you have the vowel letter at the end of the syllable and it says the long sound. Closed is when the vowel is in the middle of a syllable or at the beginning and it says the short sound. For me, the jury is out whether you need to say open and closed syllable or whether it's okay just to say, you know, long vowel and short vowel syllable, or just to refer to the sound, the long and the short vowel, and have them practice that. So it is valuable and important to give kids a strategy for reading long words. What you just, if you agree with what I just described, that's kind of what's in like a program like Rewards. If you all know Rewards, Rewards is a program that does, they kind of call it this like, call it a covert and overt strategy, but it's very much like this, a very quick and simple strategy that kids can apply when they're reading. There are much more complicated ways to do syllable division, and I actually have a paper I recently published suggesting that teaching syllable division is not such a good idea, but something like what I described is pretty good. But let me ask you, Deb, did I get it? Did I get it partly right at least?
Yeah, I'm aware of the sort of controversy, and I wanted your opinion, number one. I'm really interested in hearing that you've written a paper on it, which I'll go ahead and find. I've just found it so it allows very young children to read multisyllabic words very quickly, or multisyllable words very quickly, and because they do that, it becomes very important to them. So I just wanted your take on it, and yes, you did answer my question, and I feel confident moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me put a link to the paper in the chat. So if you are interested in it, you can actually read it. Where's my screen? That's the.
Perfect. That would be great if you could share that in the chat.
Yeah, let me find that. Here it is. Okay.
And then,
so this is the this is the actual official paper. Just kind of inside baseball, how publishing works. I'm allowed to share with the world the last version of the paper before it got published, but I can't for free give you the version that the publisher has. The result is that this is actually almost identical to the official paper. It just doesn't look like, it looks like, you know, I wrote it for like a class or something, but this is actually the paper that was accepted by Reading Research Quarterly, which is the journal. So you can, if you go on their website, you can see the fancier looking version, but I think you have to pay to get it. So
yeah, of course.
awesome.
All right, thanks. And I have another question, but it's not, so it won't benefit everyone else. So I'll write it in the chat later on. So,
okay.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
And then Sarah has a question. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. So another area where there's been some controversy lately, especially if you follow some of the Facebook groups, is whether or not to use letters when doing phonemic awareness.
Yeah.
I was wondering for your take on that.
Yeah, so yeah, that's a really great question. So there are a lot of historical data suggesting that teaching kids, you know, about sounds without letters can be really useful. So phonological awareness, which, you know, you can do with a blindfold, right? You can practice these sound activities without looking at letters. There are data from programs going back to, you know, the early 1980s. There's a famous study by Benita Blackman who did this in, I think in Syracuse in the early 80s or something like that. And there's actually, they recently published a paper showing that 25 years later, the students who had participated in the program still had better word reading skills than kids who didn't. Not kids, than adults. Like they were like almost 30 and they still had better word reading skills if they participated in the program. And the program did a lot with phonological awareness without letters. So there's absolutely data suggesting that focusing on phonological awareness where you practice activities without sounds, that can be really effective. The trick of it is that it also doesn't hurt a lot of times to teach kids with letters, right? So, if you're reading and learning about the letter S and you're practicing the sounds, sort of seems like, why would you not include the letter in that practice in some way, or read words with the letters and point out the sounds? And there are data suggesting that programs that sort of do that are maybe more effective. But it doesn't mean that no practice just with sounds is a bad idea, especially because if you want to have kids practice initial sounds, you're not always going to be able to find words with initial sounds that include everything you've already practiced. So you want to read roof or, sound, if you want to do the initial sound for roof, you can do the initial sound for roof if you have the oo sound, if you have the r sound that you're teaching, but you haven't taught the oo sound yet. That's not an option really if you're going to do it with letters, because you don't want, that might be confusing to students. So, I think, and there are plenty of data that segmenting and blending phonologically are useful exercises. And part of the reason that's true is it kind of goes back to what I was talking about with Deb, which is that there's this part of decoding that involves sort of taking the pronunciation you gave, so you sort of sounded out a word. You're like, let's say it was, fan. You said, and then you have to do these mental gymnastics of turning that into fan. Well, those mental gymnastics, otherwise known as, people sometimes call it set for variability, but, or sometimes we call it mispronunciation correction, even though, basically if we sound it out the wrong way, which we often do, can we make these little adjustments to it to turn it into a real word? And that adjustment involves sounds. So if I am saying and then I have to turn the sounds into a word, that's a sound activity. I just did it with letters, but now I'm doing the sound activity. And I've done some research showing that it actually is kind of a separate piece of reading skill, is to kind of do these, mental, gymnastics, as I said, like, which is really just, manipulating the sounds in your brain until you get the, the right thing from the wrong thing. And so that suggests, and my data actually suggested that being able to do that, like being able to sort of link the wrong pronunciation to the right pronunciation, is actually separate, a little bit separate from phonological awareness, and actually potentially more important. So we've actually, in some of my sort of instructional programs we've been designing, we've been starting to add in actual mispronunciation correction as an activity. I cannot tell you yet that it is totally effective. There are some studies on that, but we have been asking kids to, we say the word the wrong way and they have to make it the right way. And that is a phonological activity. So, I am definitely sort of in general on the side of, it's okay to do it with letters. I would say it's okay to do it with letters. It doesn't mean you can never do it with letters. It's okay to do it with letters. You don't always have to do it with letters, is how I feel about it. The other thing that I know has been kind of going around the world, which I feel more strongly about, is whether you need to do complex phonological awareness. So some of you may know there have been, and whether you need to do it in upper grades. Some people have been advocating for doing more complex phonological awareness exercises, like doing sound replacement, substitution, like if that's fan, make fin kind of things. And then if that's fin, make, din or whatever. And so you sort of substitute sounds and things like that. And, you switch them and you delete them and add them. So you could say, if the word is, spit, you could say, now say spit without the p sound. They have to take out the p sound and say sit. The data suggesting that that's important are not strong. So, so basically the segmenting and blending strategies, as well as the identification of individual sounds, those are useful. The reason the identification of individual sounds is useful is because it's sort of precursor to segmenting. So if you can identify the initial sound, you're kind of able to eventually kind of break the word into parts. And segmenting and blending, blending is really the core of the decoding exercise. If you say f, I, n, you have to turn that into fin. That's what decoding is. That's blending. Segmenting is basically what you do when you spell. You say a word like fin and you figure out that's a f, I, and n sound. And then you sort of like associate those sounds with letters. And one thing that's not in this program is guidance about spelling, about how to spell things. So some of you may know, like, they're sort of, not rules, but patterns where, when do you have a double L and a, double, F? There's this thing called the floss rule, where you have a short vowel and you double consonants, the F, L, S, and Z after a short vowel. And none of that is in here because this is focused on reading, not on spelling. But if it were a spelling, program, then I would have focused more on, the sort of pronunciations. But in any case, segmenting is associated with spelling because when you spell, you have to sort of say the spoken word and then break it into phonemes and match the phonemes to letters. So, so that's where that can be helpful. But again, this more complex manipulation doesn't have a basis in as having strong evidence. Lindemood Bell does include some of this kind of substitution kind of thing. They do it with letters. So Lindemood Bell has this thing, they call it tracking, where the kids actually manipulate the letters, and it's all sound focused, but they actually have these little tiles and they move things around. The tiles have letters printed on them. So Lindemood Bell does a phonological awareness exercise with letters. And Lindemood Bell is a program that has been shown to have positive evidence and improvement on student achievement for kids with serious difficulty in some areas. So, so certainly that has letters and that's good. And it has some of that manipulation stuff, which is popular now. But there are no data suggesting older students need that. And the reason that those activities, I don't know how to explain this easily, but basically kids who are better at that tend to have better working memory. And the goal of reading instruction is not for kids to improve their working memory. The goal is for them to get better at reading. And so when you do an activity that really presses on working memory, some kids are going to be bad at that and have a hard time at that, not because they can't do the reading, but because they have weak sort of working memory skills. And so, because, if you have to delete a sound, you have to keep the word in memory, then you have to figure out what's going to be removed from it. You have to do that manipulation and then you say it. And so all of that is really difficult to do and requires strong working memory. And as you all almost certainly know, lots of kids reading difficulty also have attention difficulty. So, something that's going to press on working memory is really going to be hard, likely really hard for kids who have, serious reading difficulty. And I would add that, for the kids who have that reading difficulty and the working memory difficulty, that's where letter tiles are helpful, or letters are helpful, because then again, you can use the letter tiles as kind of a visual anchor for the sounds. That's another reason that some people do like rainbow tiles, or they have like little mats that have like, little, people use like mancala, like, little glass beads or whatever, and have the kids use those for sounds. I think that's not bad either. And all those things come from, programs and approaches that are, have evidence supporting them. So I think I'm sorry, this is a really long answer, but I don't think there's one answer to that question. I think that there is You know, but I think you should hopefully have gotten my, you know, answer that, like, I think the letters can be helpful. I don't think you need them all the time. And that this super complex phonological awareness that people are suggesting you should do in the upper grades has no basis in fact. Please don't do phonological awareness exercises with on grade level third graders. It is a waste of time.
Thank you. That was a really great answer. Just one more piece that, so you touched on the more complex, but there's also some people saying not to bother doing, you know, breaking apart syllables, that you
Right.
should start at phoneme
That's what I was
level.
gonna ask
Do you
next.
agree with that?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. I mean, I don't think it's a problem to do a little bit of that for, like, you know, a week, you know, a few days. Like, I think just to kind of get kids in the habit, or the, you know, getting them the idea that you break words into parts, or you put, you know, word parts together, I think that's fine. But like, if you're trying to figure out, like, do my kids need to master this? Do not focus on syllables. Use that as sort of a stepping stone to, you know, just the idea of sounds. And you can even do it with words, like, you know, break this word into the sentence into words. You know, some people do that, but don't do it for long. Use that as a stepping stone and move off of that quickly, because it's true. You know, syllable level stuff isn't really what beginning reading is about. Beginning reading is about, it's absolutely going to be either at the onset rhyme level, which I talked about, but, you know, more frequently in the way I typically teach it, and with programs that have, a lot of programs that have good evidence, you're starting at the individual sound level. And so focusing a lot on syllables isn't going to really support kids in that. And I think it's more distal to what kids need to do. And it's definitely easier for kids to do it. And I think, and so I don't think it just has as much power. So I don't think there's a problem for teaching it quickly and moving on from it. I would say, don't make kids, like, you know, get to mastery on syllable practice, even for kids who are having reading difficulty. The big thing that I would say for kids who are having reading difficulty, and I said this in, for kids who have reading difficulty, the number of sounds is really critical. Don't give kids with difficulty long words. So, and I think I didn't, in the description of the lesson guides, I didn't say to use 5 sound words, because I think 3 and 4 sound words are really kind of the key. I think 5 sound words starts to get into some of that, you know, focusing on working memory. Most syllables don't have more than 4 sounds. And so it's probably not as necessary to do 5. It starts to become an exercise and, like, look how cool this is, you know, as opposed to, like, really powerful. But 4 sounds is important because, you know, consonant clusters, or, you know, that's a technical term, but consonant blends are really hard for kids with reading difficulty. I'm sure you all have seen this. Like, you know, if you ask them what are the sounds in brick, I have a video of me working with a kid who just said b-ick, and it was really hard for him to differentiate the R or the R sound from the B sound. So getting to 4 sounds is important, but starting with and practicing a lot with 3 sounds is really key, because that's what is most difficult for kids who are having reading difficulty. And so don't go to syllables. If they're having difficulty even with syllables, that's fine, but really what they're, you know, it's not fine, it's a challenge for them. But what's really going to help them become readers is if you focus at the individual phoneme level, or even at the body rhyme level, you know, doing like at, you know, that can be helpful too for kids. And that can be a little bit helpful for poor readers and getting them to break it into fewer pieces. But in general, really key, yeah, move off of syllables quickly. Don't look for mastery for syllables. So. And so, yeah, I think everyone answered Jen's question, but I said upper grades. I sort of said, you know, like, don't do it for 3rd graders, but don't do it for 2nd graders really either. I mean, I think of phonological awareness as something you do in kindergarten and the beginning of 1st grade, and it's appropriate at that time. The data have always suggested that you don't need more than 5 or 10 minutes a day, and it's all about practice with that. So if you're doing, you know, I have those little routines in there, they're designed to be fast. Those lessons aren't designed to be long. And so you're moving on quickly from that to other activities. So So you don't want to do this with kids who already get the structure of the language. They get the letter sound structure of the language. It doesn't make a lot of sense to continue to focus on this skill that students have already partly acquired. And if they can't do all the substitution and deletion stuff, like, that maybe indicates something about their working memory and the fact that they have difficulty there. That doesn't mean that they have, difficulty with the reading. It's really more about an other challenge that they have that's sort of overlapping probably. That's not, that's not entirely data-based, that point, except that it is true that kids who have reading difficulty often have challenges working memory, and that data suggests that segmenting and blending are really the key. And so, I think kind of in theory, it makes sense that, these other activities are sort of pressing on working memory. And some of my colleagues have sort of, you've all kind of agreed that that's possible, at least that that's what's going on, why it seems like poor readers have difficulty with, deletion. It's like, well, yeah, that's because they have working memory challenges, not because they have problems with deletion.
That's great. Excellent. Anyone else? I think we, Deb, you had another.
Yeah, well, as we step away from syllable work at the really young age, I'm seeing these kids come to me who are middle and high school students who can't read some words and can't spell some words because they don't have that concept of syllables and words, and really struggle with identifying all of the syllables and words. So I don't hear you suggesting don't work with that at that level, but I wonder, and Devin, this is just one of those things that's kind of like, why is kids writing so horrible? It's because we're not asking them to write very much anymore, right? So if you're not practicing it, you're not getting it. And the kids who need the practice aren't getting syllable practice, even at the younger age, so that they have it to carry forward.
Yeah, so I wonder if what you're thinking about in terms of syllables is a little bit different than what people are often talking about in kindergarten, which is like clap the syllables, like alligator, right? Like that's the thing I'm saying, like that's not useful. But what you're probably I'm guessing you're talking about is like when there are longer words that have multiple syllables and you're trying to figure out how to decode those words after you've done a lot of work with monosyllabic words, is it useful to talk about syllables at that point? I think the answer is yes. Like kids need to be able to break words into syllable parts and read those parts. In this paper that I shared with you, like it's pretty clear in that paper that one of the first things I say is like, there are lots of kids who can read one syllable words, but it's hard when it gets to two, And so, and that's what I think does require something extra for some kids. And that's where that something extra in some cases becomes syllable division, which my paper suggests is like not a good idea, not even because it's really not talking about working memory intensive. That's very working memory intensive, but also because like it doesn't work that much. Like there are lots of words that don't follow the syllable division patterns that people talk about. So I think kids absolutely need a strategy for breaking words into parts, and then they need to be able to look at each of those parts and and then sort of figure out what those parts say and put them together. So 100% that is important. And that's where breaking words, maybe, teaching them about long and short vowels or open and closed syllables and having them practice saying it one way or say it a different way and saying it a different way and sort of figuring out which is correct. That I think is important. And also this goes to the importance of morphology. So teaching kids about meaning units in words is something people have been focusing a lot more on recently and something I've done a lot of work on too. And it makes sense because, morphemes like shun, but even more simple like pre and re and so on, these occur really frequently in English. English has a lot of polymorphemic words. After like second grade, the vast majority of words are polysyllabic, and they're also polymorphemic. So And so like that is, you know, that's important, right? Like, I also, so in other words, if you get to second grade, like it's not likely that you are going to see a lot of monosyllabic words, and it's not likely you're going to see that many words that aren't polymorphemic. Like lots of words have morphemes. So getting kids to attend to meaning parts in words is also really helpful. So teaching them about different morphemes and their meanings and finding them in words, like, you know, that is really important and useful. So yeah, so syllable stuff, you know, looking at polysyllabic words is really important, just not syllable clapping, you know.
Right. Well, I just analyzed some middle school spelling assessments, and the single syllable words really were fine. And the second you got to a 2-syllable word, their worlds fell apart. And so these are middle school kids who still can't easily break those into 2 syllables so they can attend to just that syllable to do the spelling work on.
Right. Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. And let me share with you also, I think this is the final version. I'm going to share with you also, let's see, hang on, make sure I got the right one. I'm going to share with you a paper that I just published with a colleague of mine, Elfriede Hebert, where we looked at how many polysyllabic words there are in English, and like by grade too. And so I wanted to share that with you. I think this is the last version that we had before it got published, but hopefully there aren't.
I'm really interested in that. Thanks, Devin.
Yeah, so definitely. Let me just see if this is the right version. I'm going to share it. I think it is. So I'm putting in the chat a link to a paper that we did on the number of monosyllabic and polysyllabic words that occur in 3 core programs: Hope Mifflin Harcourt, Scott Forstman, and McGraw-Hill. And basically we looked at in kindergarten, in 1st grade and 3rd grade programs, how often you have, you know, words have more than one phoneme, how often they have more than one morpheme, and you know, a lot of words are polymorphemic, especially once you take out all of the like high frequency words. There are a lot of words that are polymorphemic in the language, and so it is. Let's see. So yeah, so in 3rd grade, 57% of individual new words students learn are, 57% of individual words kids learn are polymorphemic. So basically more than half of the words 3rd graders see that aren't high frequency words. That is, you know, more than half of the words. So we better teach kids something about morphemes. So you'll see that as well. And also in this paper, you'll see too, that by 3rd grade of new words the kids are learning, only 30% don't have more than 1 syllable. So, and so we better be teaching kids lots of words that we need to be teaching about syllables for sure.
This was excellent. Thank you very, very much. So it is 11:30, and I know we're getting close to the end of the time, our scheduled time. If no one has any other questions, Devin, can people email you if they have anything else? Or
yeah, for sure. So yeah, my email address, you can use my Gmail, is probably easiest.
Okay.
I'll put it in the chat. If you go to my website, so I have a website you can go to, and it has like copies of some of my papers on it, and links to some other resources. I'll share one thing that people really like, that is also, I'm going to share my screen again. It's also embedded in the Texas lessons, but it's called Finder. So if you go to, so I have on my website, devinkearns.org, a link to this Finder, Phinder, And if you go to Finder, what the Finder allows you to do is if you want to like figure out your own list of words for a lesson, you can like click on it here in the sound spelling and the grapheme, click on it here in the phoneme, and then you can search for words. And it'll bring up a list of words that contain the sound spelling that you're interested in. So these are some examples here, but you can also do, if you want to do like IE or something, you can do IE, say IE says I, and then you say search for words. It'll give you all the words where IE says I. So, oh, I see. So, okay, thanks. So I sent, so Deb just told me that I didn't send the links to everybody. I sent them just to her. So I am changing. Okay, the other one I sent to everybody. So yeah, so this is the paper where we looked at programs and looked at how many polysyllabic words and polymorphemic words there are. So in any case, people really like Finder because it's just kind of a easy resource to find lessons or words for lessons. So that's that's there. But you can also, like, if you want to learn more about other research I've done, and there's stuff for teachers on there. There's actually, I made a high frequency word list. So that list, it's also in the Texas lessons. You can download from my website too. So here it is, in large print. Then also I have on the website, if you're interested in the words, but not so much in all the program materials, there's also a list of like lots and lots of words where the different letters are there. Note that it says this here, but really be careful with this. It is very hard to eliminate every single word that you should not see in a list of words for kids. It is much harder than I anticipated. Like, you're like, I got them all. And then you're like, nope, that's one that kids don't need to see. So, so just be careful with this. Like, there are all kinds of words here. This is also true on Finder. Like, it's not designed to be something you directly share with kids. So just so you know that, just be careful with it. But it's designed to just give you a bunch of words. It's organized by sound spelling. It's organized in terms of frequency. So it's similar to the Texas list, but it goes further. So it goes into some that aren't on the Texas list, like, I don't know, like T says nothing, like in listen, or WR says, or people like these other things. So that's available on my website too. So you are, welcome to. I also have the Dolce and Fry list because I could never find them online. Every time I went to look for that, I couldn't find them. So if you want the Dolce list or the Fry list, on my list, here it is. So so anyway, so that's just some resources on there. So yeah, so the link to the website, so it's that's my website, and then the other one, the Finder, is devinkearns.com. I own both devinkearns.org and devinkearns.com. It's not corporate. I don't make any money on it. But so if you go to devinkearns.com, that's where the /Finder, that's where Finder is, and devinkearns.org is my page. So you can see.
And did you want to share your emails? Well, I don't think people got that.
Oh yeah, because they sent it. Okay, yeah. So yeah. Yeah, there that is. You can also email me through the website. There's a place where it says email, and you can email me that way too. But the easiest thing to do is just to write down Gmail. I get those messages most easily and right away. So, so feel free to send me an email.
Thank you so much. This is great. Thanks for taking the time this morning to present this.
No, I'm really glad. I mean, I haven't had a
great.
chance to really, help
really
people
helpful.
dig into these. And so, yeah, hopefully it'll be useful to people. I'm also really happy, interested in hearing people's feedback about this. Like, my goal is to continue to refine this. I did this for Texas, but I want to continue to do some of this. And so, I'm curious to hear people's feedback. Please, please, please email me with your thoughts It's good for me to know from you in a nice email the things you don't like. It's much harder if it's in the middle of a webinar. So, you know, I'd rather, you know, well, I'm happy to hear in a webinar too, it's fine. But if, you know, if you have thoughts, I mean, I'm curious to hear them. So please don't hesitate to email.
Yep. Thank you very much. All right, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for having
Bye,
me.
Kevin. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.